Opinion is split on the ANC's court application to have the IEC reopen the system used to submit the names of candidates for the upcoming local government elections. The party's Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte confirmed this week that it will take its case to the electoral court after the ANC failed to convince the IEC to grant its request. Duarte said glitches in the system led to the party not being able to submit the names of candidates in around 30 municipalities. Political analyst Ebrahim Fakir has spent years monitoring electoral developments in the country and now joins us to talk more about this latest development. Ebrahim, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Newsfeed PM. Let me get your take first on the ANC's argument for the reopening of the electorals, the candidate registration at least.
I think there's only one response. We must derisively laugh it out of hand, because it really is completely absurd, to be perfectly honest. I can't imagine. It's like a school child going to the teacher or a university person going to the lecturer and saying, sorry, all the other students in class must hand in their assignments at this time, but we must be given additional time without any good reason, of course, without any sound reason. So I think it's completely problematic, and it's again kind of invoking this idea that there's one set of rules for everyone else and another set of rules for the ANC. And understandably, I mean, they simply can't get their house in order, and they want everyone else to carry the can. So basically, it's them externalizing the cost of their own internal fractionalism and factionalism and the inability to contain it and then make it everyone else's problem.
And it's interesting that you make the point about a different set of rules for the ANC from everyone else. Yesterday, a day ago, in fact, the IFP's Mkhuleko Hlengwa was tweeting about applications. He says here in 2011, the IFP missed a submission deadline in Mzumbe and parts of Mpumalanga. In 2016, he goes on to say the NFP missed the registration fee deadline. The Electoral Court upheld the IEC timeline and denied them participation on both accounts. So I wonder then if the Electoral Court rules in favor of the ANC here, if we're not going to see yet another hurdle, another issue in the road to elections that already at this point are facing so many challenges.
It certainly will, Tembikile, and the problem that the ANC and I think the rest of society doesn't appreciate is if you look at the rest of the continent is replete with examples in which the germanity of conflict which emerges is germane to the idea that you blame the independent electoral administrator and the electoral manager because you didn't get your political house in order, you can't contain conflict inside your party, and to hell with society. It spills over there and it causes unceasing and unending conflict. That's fine, as long as our political aims and goals are achieved. And that's what they're trying to do here. Systematically, the IEC has always ranked amongst the top of all of our public institutions. And because opposition parties are not immune from this, systematically eroding the credibility of the IEC by complaining and moaning about things which are not their fault, which are the fault of Parliament, which are the fault of the political parties, and so on. Secondly, there are so many processes and structures in the IEC, such as multi-party liaison committees, as one example, in which all of these decisions around the timetable, around scheduling, around the major decisions which affect all the parties are actually canvassed and deliberated on and concluded. Now, parties who don't participate there then come out and cry foul and say, we weren't consulted, we weren't part of making this decision. I mean, doesn't it strike you as curious that all the other parties were faced with exactly the same problems of COVID-19, of whatever limitations there might have been, and to this extent that there were system glitches? It appears as if it's only a glitch for the ANC, not for everyone else. So, it sounds completely absurd to me, and I honestly think that if the Electoral Court actually interprets this without evidence and without real substantive evidence showing that it is the problem of the IEC and the problem of the electoral manager, then we must have absolutely no sympathy and no truck for this.
Just on that point, we've also got the EFF, which is not thrilled with the not with the IFP, but with the IEC, because on deadline day, that deadline was extended from 5 to 9 p.m., apparently on the grounds that the IEC had received requests to do so from various political parties. The EFF says the electoral body must now actually disclose where those requests came from. Is that an important disclosure?
Absolutely, because the entire edifice of the multi-party liaison committees, of the decision-making, of the whole regulatory framework is actually dependent on transparency. When it is opaque and when it is untransparent, and when you cannot make out what the rationality and the rationale for the decision is, it causes the kind of suspicion that we see that is now rife. So that disclosure is important. That said, Tembekile, it's important to appreciate that no electoral process is absolutely perfect, right? To the extent that a codified set of rules is made, certain contingencies have to be accounted for. But those contingencies have to be consistently applied, they have to be fair, and they have to be rational. So they have to make sense, and they must equally apply to everyone, all of the electoral participants. And in that instance, it would be important where small extensions are made to accommodate certain contingencies which can arise and which do arise. That's understandable, provided there's sufficient disclosure and provided that there is sufficient transparency in the process. So that is vital. But of course, we mustn't lose sight of the fact that parties, including the EFF, are going to scapegoat and use the IEC to explain away the paucity and their inability to actually make inroads in terms of electoral support in a widespread basis. So it's easy to blame the IEC for things that you can't get right politically. And that's something society has to be extremely cautious of.
And you followed the work of the IEC and the running of our elections for the better part of, 2 decades, without giving away your age here. And
thanks very much.
And whenever we head towards elections, during the elections themselves and post, there are complaints. But how would you compare the IEC's running of the process this far for the 2021 local government elections to previous polls in the country? Have they covered themselves in glory?
Mikile, the circumstances are exceptional. We are dealing with a pandemic which has been going on for the better part of a year and a half. So the IEC is working under those constrained circumstances. The credibility, as I say, of the IEC has never been in question. Its legitimacy as an independent operational manager and administrator has always been impeccable. To the extent, and remember, these complaints have been made against the IEC from day one. The party funding regime is not fair. We don't have adequate access to the broadcast and the airwaves. The media coverage is unfair. People have always made those things the problem of the IEC. But actually, they're the problem of the broadcasters and the Broadcast Act. They are the problem of, particularly when it comes to party funding, the regulatory regime determined not by the IEC, but by political parties in Parliament. That's their problem. It was always made the problem of the IEC. Now, small irregularities, administrative glitches, procedural problems, logistical issues happen in everyone. Who can't remember the scenes of chaos and long queues under Obama administration America when they held elections, or subsequent to that? In many countries around the world, no electoral process is perfect and foolproof. If everyone agrees on the outcome, that's the measure of the credibility, the freeness, and the fairness of the election. The IEC has acquitted itself very well. It has its own challenges, no doubt about that. The past year and a half has made it more difficult. It's muddied by the fact that there's a request for postponement of the election. People will throw all of that mud. But as an administrator, as a manager, the IEC has acquitted itself exceptionally well. There are going to be problems, make no mistake, but there's sufficiently robust oversight mechanisms, arbitration mechanisms, such as multi-party liaison committees, party agents, conflict management panels, a whole range of institutional mechanisms that assist in breaking and solving problems which might arise.
Ebrahim Fakir, good to speak to you, political analyst, giving his take on the battle then by the ANC to try and have the IEC's candidate list portal reopened to make last-minute submissions. It says it could not submit a full list of candidates in some areas in the country because of glitches in the system. We'll continue to watch that developing story as it heads to the electoral court.